The night stretched long and quiet across the vast Texas plains where the wind whispered through dry grass and the stars scattered like diamonds across the endless black sky. The Harrington ranch sat proud and sprawling over 1,000 acres, a symbol of wealth, legacy, and hard-earned power. Its owner, Ethan Harrington, was a man of 42, sharp in his movements and steady in his words. To the townsfolk, he was a name wrapped in success, the kind of man who built his fortune with sweat and sleepless nights, who owned the largest herd in the county, who carried himself with the kind of calm authority that came from knowing you owed no man anything. But inside the walls of his grand ranch house, that calm often felt hollow. His wife had passed 5 years ago, and though he never spoke of her, the silence she left behind had turned the mansion into a monument of loneliness. Most of the ranch hands had learned not to disturb that silence. The help came and went. Some stayed for seasons, others left when winter bit too hard. Yet one person had become part of the background rhythm of his days, Clara, the ranch cook. She was quiet, gentle, and always early. Her cooking wasn't just food. It was warmth, the kind that thawed cold mornings and made long days feel a little softer. Ethan didn't know much about her, where she came from, why she never smiled long enough for conversation. Only that she worked with humility and never asked for more than she needed. But that winter, when snow fell early and thick, Ethan began to notice strange things. Some nights, when the wind howled, a light glimmered faintly from the old barn behind the stables. It wasn't the usual lantern the ranch hands used. It was softer, steady, like someone living in there. He dismissed it the first few times, thinking maybe one of the young workers had snuck in for warmth or to hide from the cold. But one night, after a long meeting in town, he returned past midnight. His headlights cut across the snow-covered path, slicing through the fog, and there it was again, that pale yellow glow inside the barn. He frowned. Everyone should have been in the bunkhouse by then. Curiosity pulled him closer. He stepped out into the cold, boots crunching over frost. His coat collar turned up against the biting wind. As he neared the barn, he heard movement, gentle, slow, almost cautious. Then the faint clatter of a metal pan. Ethan paused, his breath clouding in the air. He opened the barn door quietly, and the warm smell of soup drifted toward him. And there, in the corner beneath a pile of old hay and an oil lamp, was Clara. She froze when she saw him, her eyes wide with alarm, spoon in hand, as if caught in a crime. Her blanket was thin, her hair undone, and beside her was a small bag, her only belonging. "Mr. Harrington?" she stammered, standing quickly, her face pale. Ethan's brows furrowed, confusion and disbelief crossing his usually steady features. "Clara, what are you doing here?" he asked quietly, his voice low but heavy with authority. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward the floor. I didn't mean for you to find out. I didn't have anywhere else to stay." Her words fell like snowflakes, soft but piercing. Ethan took a slow step closer, his mind trying to piece together what he was seeing. "You've been sleeping here?" he asked. She nodded faintly. "Since last month." He blinked. "You mean all this time you've been cooking for us, working long hours, and then you sleep out here in the cold?" Her lips trembled as she nodded again. "The staff house was full when I came. I didn't want to bother you, sir. I just needed work." She gave a fragile smile that broke something deep inside him. Ethan's chest tightened. He looked around, the hay stacked around her like crude walls, the thin blanket hardly enough to fight the frost, the chipped bowl of soup sitting on the ground beside a small kettle. The wealthy rancher who owned hundreds of acres, dozens of horses, and enough resources to rebuild a town, had one of his own employees living like this under his roof. Shame and anger flickered across his face, not at her but at himself. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally, his voice quiet now, not the sharp tone of a boss, but the softened sound of a man who suddenly felt small. "Because," she whispered, "people like me don't get much kindness in this world. I didn't want to risk losing my job." She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "I'm grateful for the work, sir. That's more than I've had in a long time." For a moment, the world fell silent. Only the wind sighing through the cracks of the barn. Ethan stood still, watching her, his thoughts heavy. He'd spent years building walls against pain, loss, and people. And now, standing in front of this woman who had nothing but pride and quiet strength, he realized those walls had kept him from seeing simple humanity. He took a deep breath. "Clara," he said slowly, "pack your things. You're not spending another night in this barn." She blinked in confusion. "Sir?" "You heard me," he said firmly, though his tone carried warmth now. "Tomorrow morning you're moving into the ranch house. There's a spare room next to the kitchen. It's warm, safe, and it's yours." Tears welled in her eyes. "I can't accept that." "People will talk." He gave a faint, almost tired smile. "Let them. They always do." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, thinking about the world he'd built. All the comfort that had never felt like comfort, all the wealth that meant nothing when someone under his care was shivering in a barn. The next morning, when dawn broke and sunlight stretched across the frosted fields, Ethan found Clara standing outside the barn, holding her small bag. She looked unsure, almost frightened, like a bird not ready to trust open skies. He met her gaze and nodded toward the house. "Come on," he said softly. She hesitated, then followed him, each step crunching in the snow, each step heavier with emotion. As they entered the ranch house, she paused at the doorway, the warmth washing over her. For the first time in years, she felt what home might feel like. Ethan gestured toward the guest room near the kitchen. "It's not much, but it's yours," he said. Her voice quivered. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington. I don't know how to repay you." He looked at her for a long moment. "You already have," he said quietly. "You reminded me what it means to care." As she disappeared into her new room, Ethan turned toward the window. The sun climbed higher, the frost melting into glistening drops. He knew life on the ranch would change now, not just for her, but for him too. Because sometimes wealth isn't in the land or the money, but in the moments that humble the soul. And as the light filled the ranch house, a new chapter of kindness began, one that neither of them saw coming. The winter days grew longer, softer, and filled with a kind of stillness that only comes after a storm. The ranch, once defined by routine and the steady hum of labor, began to feel alive again in ways Ethan Harrington hadn't felt in years. After moving Clara into the spare room beside the kitchen, something in the air shifted. It wasn't just her presence. It was the way she brought warmth into cold spaces, the way her quiet laughter began to echo faintly down the empty hallways, as if the house itself was remembering what joy felt like. Clara tried her best to stay invisible, to keep her head down and her work flawless. But she couldn't hide forever. Every morning she'd wake before sunrise, make coffee, and prepare breakfast as always. Yet now, when Ethan walked in, she'd look up with a shy smile, one that reached her eyes for the first time. He noticed small things. How she hummed softly while cooking, how she always left a small plate of biscuits by the fire for whoever came in late, how she mended torn gloves without being asked. Still, Clara struggled with guilt. The whispers among the ranch hands had started almost immediately, curious glances, hushed voices carried by the wind. The boss took her in. One worker murmured, "She must be something special." Others smirked, suggesting things Clara didn't have the strength to argue against. She'd been judged before, in every place she'd worked, and she'd learned to survive it in silence. But this time, it stung differently. Ethan had been kind to her, and she didn't want that kindness to be turned into gossip. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, she sat near the kitchen window, staring at the falling snow. Her hands were clasped tight around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The firelight flickered over her tired face. She didn't hear Ethan come in until he spoke softly behind her. "You're thinking too much again," she startled, turning quickly. He smiled gently, leaning against the doorway. "You wear your thoughts on your face, Clara." "I didn't hear you come in," she said, trying to smile. "I didn't mean to keep the fire going so late." He walked over, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot she'd left on the stove. "You're allowed to sit sometimes, you know. You don't have to work every minute you're awake." She looked down. "Old habits. I've spent too long trying to prove I deserve to stay wherever I am." Ethan sat opposite her, his eyes kind. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone here." For a long time, silence sat between them, not awkward, but heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, she said softly, "People are talking, Mr. Harrington." "I know," he replied calmly. "People always talk. They've been talking about me since I bought this land, but this time it's about me," she said, her voice trembling. "They think I've done something to earn your favor, something improper. I can handle people looking down on me, but I don't want your name dragged through the mud because of me." Ethan's eyes softened. "Clara, let me tell you something. The day I found you in that barn, something changed in me. I saw what I'd stopped seeing. The people behind the work, the hearts behind the hands. You didn't ask for pity. You just kept going. That kind of strength doesn't bring shame. It brings respect. She blinked hard, tears threatening. No one's ever spoken to me like that before. That's a shame, he said simply, because you deserve to hear it. The days passed, and the snow began to melt, giving way to muddy paths and the first hints of spring. Life returned to the ranch. Calves were born, fences were mended, and the land stretched awake under the rising sun. But something else bloomed quietly too, a friendship that carried the weight of something deeper, though neither dared name it. Ethan found excuses to linger in the kitchen, helping her carry flour sacks or fix the old pantry door. Clara found herself smiling more freely, her laughter soft and genuine. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast. The sky turned grey and rain lashed against the windows. Lightning split the horizon, shaking the old barn. Ethan was out in the fields, trying to secure the horses when he saw Clara running toward him, her shawl whipping in the wind. "Mr. Harrington," she shouted over the thunder, "you can't stay out here. It's too dangerous." He turned, drenched but smiling faintly. "I have to get the last mare in." She didn't listen. She rushed forward, grabbing the reins beside him, her hands trembling but determined. Together, they led the frightened horse into the stable, slamming the doors against the wind. When it was finally over, both of them stood in the dark barn, soaked to the bone, breathing hard, and then they laughed. It started small, then grew louder, echoing off the wooden walls. For a moment, they weren't a rancher and his cook. They were two souls who'd fought the storm together and won. When they returned to the house, Clara handed him a towel and began drying his hair like a mother might tend to a child. He watched her, a warmth spreading in his chest he hadn't felt in years. "Clara," he said quietly, "when I lost my wife, I thought I'd buried every piece of my heart with her. I thought the only thing left for me was work. But lately I find myself looking forward to small things again, like hearing your voice in the morning, like knowing someone else is in this house." Clara froze, her heart pounding. "You shouldn't say that, sir," she whispered. "Why not? Because I'm just your employee." He smiled sadly. "You're more than that." For a moment their eyes met, a fragile, dangerous moment full of everything unsaid. Then she looked away, retreating behind her quiet strength. "Good night, Mr. Harrington," she murmured, disappearing into her room. The following weeks brought new light to the ranch. The grass turned green again, the rivers thawed, and laughter returned to the air. But something deeper was growing beneath the surface, something neither of them could ignore. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the hills, Clara found Ethan standing by the fence line, looking out across his land. She walked up beside him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You still think about her?" she asked gently. He nodded. "Every day. But lately, it doesn't hurt the same way. Maybe that's what healing feels like." She smiled softly. "Sometimes we don't need to forget the past. We just need someone to help us carry it differently." He looked at her then, and for the first time she didn't look away. "Clara," he said quietly, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. No one on this land deserves comfort more than you. You've given this place life again. You've given me life again." Tears glistened in her eyes as she whispered, "You gave me a home when I had none." The wind moved through the tall grass, carrying their silence with it. And in that golden hour, something unspoken became understood. It wasn't about romance or promises. It was about 2 broken hearts that had found warmth again in a cold world. That night, Ethan sat by the fire and thought about the woman who had changed his life by simply being kind, strong, and humble. He realized wealth wasn't measured in acres or cattle. It was measured in how much light you could bring into someone else's darkness. And so, when spring came fully and the ranch blossomed with color, Ethan did something that surprised everyone. He called the workers together and announced, "From this day forward, every person working here will have a proper home on this land. No one sleeps in barns again." The men cheered, but Clara just stood at the edge, tears quietly rolling down her cheeks. She didn't need recognition. The gesture itself said everything. As the ranch thrived and the sun sank behind the horizon, Ethan turned to Clara and smiled. "You taught me that kindness isn't weakness, it's strength." She smiled back, her eyes glowing in the fading light. "And you taught me that even when the world forgets you, someone out there still believes you deserve warmth." The two stood there, the wealthy rancher and the woman who once lived in his barn, bound not by circumstance, but by grace. And in that moment, the ranch didn't just feel like land. It felt like home.